Right now, we're talking to one of the OGs of hair metal, I like to say, Mr. Steve Brown from Trixter, a founding member of Trixter. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, thanks, Mike, for having me on, and I can't wait to get up to Worcester, Mass. on Saturday to rock for everybody.
Yeah, so Trixter are playing the HairFest After Party at Rascals here in Worcester. You must have played Worcester a few times before.
Oh, hell yeah. We've played the world-famous Worcester Centrum a couple times. We did that, I believe, in 1991. We did that on the Scorpions Crazy World Tour when we were supporting the Scorps. And then I think we did it again. I know we did it again in 1992 on the Kiss Revenge Tour. And then I've been there a couple times. Most notably, I would always go up there. Ed Van Halen and Alex Van Halen are good friends of mine. God bless Ed. And I remember the last time I was at the Worcester Centrum was when Van Halen played there in '95.
Wow.
And I drove up from Jersey. I was like sitting at home, and I go, you know what? Van Halen's at the Worcester Centrum. I'm going up to see Ed now. So I drove up and had a great time. I remember Collective Soul was opening.
Wow.
And always, Trixter has had a long, long love affair with Massachusetts. When our first record came out, one of the first places we played, when we first road trips we took as a national act, was when we played Axis in Boston, right over by Fenway Park. So.
Yep.
And we, again, the support from our Boston, Massachusetts, Worcester fans has always been there. Brother, you guys, Boston is rock and roll.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's Aerosmith, Extreme, all the other great, smaller bands that have come out of there, we just love it. So we're looking forward to it.
That's right. We definitely like it loud here in New England. That's for sure.
That's for sure, man.
Now, you talked about opening for Kiss, playing with the Scorpions. You're friends with Van Halen. When you guys, when you guys started touring, and that album came out and you started getting support spots, what band was really helpful to you guys? Because I know some bands don't even want to deal with their opening act. But on some of those, some of those bands, who kind of reached out and took you under their wing and kind of showed you the way a little bit?
Well, I would definitely have to say, our first tour that we did in September of 1990, we opened up for Stryper. And I remember it was, our first show was up in Toronto, Canada. And I remember we got to the hotel and all of a sudden we're going up to our rooms and I see Michael Sweet and he's hanging out of his room. Like he sort of got the door open and I could hear guitars. Him and Oz were jamming and they were drinking a bottle of wine. And I remember, this is one thing that I remember, and still to this day, Michael Sweet is one of my best friends, and Oz, we love those guys. And they immediately, I hadn't even met them. And they were like, hey, man, you're the Trixter guys. Come into our room, have a drink. And, we're working on guitar parts. And I vividly remember that as one of those moments where I went, these guys are so cool. Like, they don't even know us. And they invited me and PJ into their room. And that was the start of it. And I will have to say that every band that we ever toured with, we definitely learned something from. Because we were, so young and impressionable, and we were sponges for knowledge, and we wanted to learn. And for me, I wanted to learn about everything, whether it was playing guitar, singing, writing songs, the business aspect. That was always, I started Trixter when I was 12 years old.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you. I can't believe I never knew that. You were 12 when you started. 12! Yeah. You weren't even a teen, technically a teen yet. And you started then. I mean, what? So what were you doing at 12? I mean, at that point, how long had you been making music at 12 years old?
Well, yeah. I mean, and let's get back to the touring thing. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to make sure that we finish that. Yeah. Every band that we toured with, Stryper, Don Dokken, we learned from everybody what to do and what not to do. And, of course, it was, the Poison guys. Poison was the first tour that we did in beginning of 1991 where we played arenas. Our first arena was opening for Poison and Slaughter at Muskegon, Michigan.
Wow.
And that was one of the seminal moments of our lives because I got to tell you, man, we never cared about making records, making videos. All we ever wanted to do was play arenas like Van Halen Halen, like Kiss, like Def Leppard and Bon Jovi. We wanted to follow in those footsteps. So to play with Poison, sold out arena, and Brett and the guys were so nice to us that after the show they brought us into, their dressing room, and there were girls and champagne, and it was like, again, the biggest lesson that I've learned in this business 41 years later of, Trixter Mania is just be nice to everybody and try to help other people, and that's my mission as an older statesman, I guess, of rock and roll. Is I like to help younger bands and give them advice and tell them what to do and what not to do, because I've seen it all and kind of done it all. So that's very important. And, getting back to starting the band, and crazy to think about it, that in 2025 now, we just passed our 41st year of being in Trixter. The first Trixter show was July 8th of 1984. We played our first show. So we are well past 41 years now, and no one would ever believe that. But, Mike, when I started playing guitar in 1978, and it was an obsession. I became obsessed with Kiss and Van Halen. I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. I wanted to be Ace Frehley. And, those were the two guitar players that changed my life. And, and then after that, it was Cheap Trick. Then it was Def Leppard and AC/DC and Randy Rhoads. And so, and I don't know how old you are, but back then we didn't have all these distractions like the kids do nowadays. So it was before MTV, so it was listening to vinyl, listening to cassettes, 8-track. I had Van Halen 1 on an 8-track tape player, and that was my education, and I just fell in love with all the aspects of rock and roll. And so I just knew immediately that this was going to be my life because I was so obsessed with it. And luckily, I come from a great family. My dad was a strong personality. He was a semi-pro baseball player who became a high school coach and principal. He was the vice principal of the middle school that all the Trixter guys went to. And then when I graduated 8th grade, he went to the high school with us. So the joke is my dad, Charlie Brown, was the reason that all the Trixter guys graduated high school because he told all the teachers, whatever they do, they're playing rock and roll. They're out all night. They got long hair now. Just give them a C. And that's how I got through high school.
Yeah, just give them a C. That's just classic. Give them a C. So how old were you when you started recording well, you guys recorded an album. That kind of got shelved. But how old were you when you started recording that debut album? What was that, 1989? Were you recording that?
Yeah, that was 89. So, yeah, we got signed and, after, and again, all the people that say, oh, Trixter was an overnight sensation, it really was not the case. The band started in 1984, and it was 5 years of building it up, and we became the biggest band in northern New Jersey. Of course, we were part of the whole John Bon Jovi explosion. It was Bon Jovi, then it was Skid Row, and then it was Trixter. So we were so honored to be a part of that scene. And as you might know or not know, John Bon Jovi was the first, guy to get behind Trixter back in 1986. So, our sort of thanks to him are never ending. And, of course, the Skid Row guys. But, yeah, 1989, we got signed to Mechanic MCA Records. We went out to L.A., and we recorded our debut album, which 90% of it was recorded there. And then we came back to New York and finished it. And, and I was having this conversation last night with a buddy of mine of how lucky, again, we were to be a part of that scene. And we made our record in the world famous Sound City recording studio. Dave Grohl made the documentary on analog 24-track tape in the same recording studio that Dio recorded, Holy Diver, in the same studio that Fleetwood Mac did Rumors, and just, again, man, it never gets lost on us, for PJ and I, how lucky we were to be a part of what I consider, as we're talking about hair metal and hair bands and everything, to be a part of that scene, because I believe it's one of the most important and the most fun and the greatest moments of rock and roll history, the 80s music. And whether it's the 80s hard rock or just 80s music in general, I still to this day think in 100 years from now, it will be remembered as one of the greatest decades of music ever. So, thank God we were a part of it.
The fun part was definitely there. And I can't imagine you're a teenager going to Los Angeles to record, your debut album. The distractions as a teenager must have been phenomenal. I mean, you're a teenager, you're all juiced up on hormones, you're like, it's like you're living your dream at that point. There must have been some distractions there. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were, and the good news is luckily our managers were smart enough to know they got us out there 2 weeks early so we'd have some time to get settled in, because, at that point I had only I went to California probably 6 months before we went out there as a band to meet with producers. And I remember that was my first time in California and being in Hollywood and I remember going to Rick Rubin's office, with Deaf American Records. And, because my manager at the time went to NYU with Rick Rubin and George Drakoulias. George produced the first two Black Crowes records, and being there. And then we went out afterwards, and I remember being at a nightclub, and all of a sudden Slash walks in, and he comes right up to me and right up to Rick Rubin, and we're all hanging out. And I'm like, holy shit, this is what LA's all about. And then so when we were out there to do the record as a band, our managers, like I said, they had the foresight to say, let's get these guys there early so they can party and have some fun. And one of the coolest stories about going out there, we went out and we lived in an apartment together, and it was incredible. But the first week or whatever that we went out, we went to this famous club, Bordello, and we're there. And as I told you, Van Halen was the band that got us, gave us the inspiration to do everything. So as we're sitting at this bar, we were underage and it didn't matter. They're giving us drinks and whatnot. We're at this bar and I look over and lo and behold, it's David Lee Roth. And at that point, man, I got to tell you, Dave, whether it was Dave or Eddie, they were our gods.
Yeah.
And we look, and I remember Gus, our drummer, pokes me. He goes, dude, David Lee Roth is over there. And I was like, holy shit, there he is. He was riding his motorcycle with his buddies, and he had a black leather suit on, black leather riding suit, and he looked so cool. He had a cigarette and a drink in his hand, and I was like sitting there going, I got to go over and talk to him. And I'll never forget this. I went right up to him, and he was so nice. And I just said, Dave, and I had a couple drinks in me at that point. And I said, Dave, I just got to tell you this.